information on
turning it on
supplementing and supplanting.
Oh, good.
All right, you're live.
Well, Bill and Rebecca, thanks for agreeing to do this. There are a lot of people who are going to be attending these workshops, and we'll be interested in some of the things you both have been doing over the past months. And so just as, for those who don't know this, Vermont State Board of Education took on an unparalleled task of writing a position paper on assessment, and Bill, you took the lead in writing that paper, and it got a lot of national press. And Rebecca, you've also got quite a bit of national press by writing a letter to parents that could be sent out by schools when they release their AYP results, which essentially said our schools aren't all failing, it's the law that's failing. So the series of workshops we're doing is centered on kind of three important things. First of all, we're going to be introducing a new assessment, and along with that we'll be introducing we don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet, but a new assessment, new accountability system, and we also have an opportunity to just change and improve our practices around assessment. So that's what I'm hoping you'll talk to us about. But I thought we'd just get started with you, Bill. What led the board to give you this interesting task of writing a position paper? And can you tell us, how that transpired and how long did it take? Because it turned out to be a very interesting paper.
Yes, let me start with a little story. When I was a school superintendent, I was giving the test results to the community forum, and I don't know what possessed me to say something this crazy, but I said, if we want our kids to compete internationally in the 21st century workforce, then they're going to have to do better. And which this mother held up her hand and said, but I don't want my son to be an international competitor in the 21st century. I want him to be a good man. I want him to be a good citizen. I want him to be a good father. I want him to work and contribute to his community. And that just blew my whole presentation because she was right. And I come to it saying the purposes of education are very broad, and test and reading and math test and paper and pencil things are only one part of it. And so the state board was really looking with educational quality standards at a much broader, much more global view of what education is and can and should be. And we were just doing these two things together, and they didn't fit. And so this got the board thinking, and there was this undercurrent that everybody feels that there's too much testing, there's too much emphasis on testing and test prep and so forth. And we need to get these other things in here too. And that led us to looking at the federal requirements. It took 4 months. And it was interesting. I was assigning school board members, state school board members, their reading assignments and discussion leadings so that they could talk about these sometimes complex issues. And they did a marvelous job, and in terms of engaging the issues in a way that I haven't seen in any other state board, and I do work with other state boards through NASB. But this was a committed group of people, and they did a very good piece of work, very complicated piece of work, and was very much concerned with what are the good purposes for testing and what are the not so good purposes. Everybody agreed we needed to do testing because that serves as an external validation measure for everything we do. But it's not everything. And so it was trying to get this balance that we were after. And I think after 4 months, I'm pretty pleased with the product.
And Rebecca, I'm going to turn this over to you. That to me, when I saw the document, I thought that it served at least two important purposes. That it allowed our board to enter into a national conversation on assessment, but it also seemed to me to be kind of a charge to us who work here at the Agency of Education to improve assessment. And as our leader in all this, what are some of the things you take from this paper that we want our folks to know at this workshop, that where we're heading and how we can use the paper to do better?
Well, I think several things, and I think Bill's spoken eloquently to one of the most important in my view, which is that we are educating students broadly across all sorts of outcomes, because we need students who are educated across all the outcomes in the education quality standards, health and wellness. They need to be educated to be participants in the civic life of our communities. They need to be able to support themselves in whatever activity they choose to pursue. They need to be well-rounded socially in order to be successful. And the board really is challenging us to think more broadly about what our purpose is as an education system, and I think that's incredibly important. On a more practical level, I think the board is challenging us to really think hard about what tests can and can't do as we try to think about improving learning. And I like to think of the tests as sort of like checking your oil in your car. And if it comes out a little low, you don't sell your car or say your car's terrible. You figure out why the oil might be a little bit low. And there might be 10 or 15 different explanations. And depending on what the 10 or 15 different explanations are and where your car is relative to those, you make some decisions about how to fix your car. You might add some more oil. You might see if you have a leak. You might see if it's been too long since your last checkup. But it's just information, and we have to use it carefully. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, and one of the things that really frustrates me about the No Child Left Behind law, is that our schools are labeled low performing based on a single indicator or set of indicators. And those indicators may not really tell the story about how we got to those places. And just to tell a story, I was at a school district recently where 2 children had moved into town who were autistic. And this school had worked very, very hard to support those children. And they did a fabulous job. They really did. And they did a service for those families. They did a service for those children who are now probably going to be able to be more independent than they would have been. And they're doing a service for the state of Vermont because we care for all of our children. However, because they were successful, some other families moved in who also had autistic children because they knew the school could do a good job. And I know the school has seen a decline in its test scores. And I say good, because what it's telling me is that this school did a really good job. And when we just look at those test scores from afar, we really don't know what's driving those test scores. And in some cases, it may be that that system has a problem and is struggling to figure out how to support children. Because I think if we educate children well, they tend to do better on tests. But it also tells me that there may be other things behind those test scores that we might want to know about, but they shouldn't be a cause for concern. And in that case, it was a small school, so having a slight change in the demographics of the school is going to affect the test scores, but it doesn't mean that school isn't doing a fantastic job. And we have to just be so humble about labeling schools based on those. And the big problem with No Child Left Behind is it attaches such strong sanctions to schools for failing to achieve what we all know isn't achievable. And so inevitably we're all going to be labeling, and we all are labeling under this label. So it's discouraging, it's a disincentive, it's not achievable, and it demeans really the integrity of learning, and it forces teachers and educators to stop focusing on teaching and stop focusing on education in the broadest sense of the word, so that they can try to measure up on these very narrow metrics.
So I want to, since we're running out of time for this section of our workshop, I want to see if I can get you both to kind of focus in on some takeaway messages. And if you can you put this in the context of, the folks are going to be learning about a new assessment system, and I'm emphasizing that word system. It has a summative assessment that's, the technologies are different, but it really is designed to serve the same purpose as our kneecap test. We also have an interim assessment that is available to teachers to use as a classroom tool, and there's part of the system that focuses on professional development for teachers to learn how to use effective formative assessments as tools. So just based on the comments you just made, and in the context of a new system, which we'll be building upon anyway, what are some takeaway messages you want to leave the audience with? What should they expect, and what should they be cautious to avoid?
Do you want to start first?
Well, another story is when I was state testing director in another state, I did these workshops on how to use test results for teachers. And I would go in and I'd put up my graphs, this back in the transparency days, and say, use this distractor and this and that and the other. And they looked at me like I had two heads. And again, the people were right in that the summative test will not give you the kind of formative information that teachers will need. You get that from different instruments, from teacher-made instruments, and what they're doing in the classroom, the feedback that you get. Just a good teacher senses what's going on in terms of the classroom. It is useful for, summative tests are useful for external reporting to the public. We have a responsibility to inform the public. And I think they give some good information to teachers. And if you do have an achievement gap between some group of students, it helps to illustrate that and show that to folks. But to say this is going to tell you exactly what you need to do to improve your specific instruction, no, I don't think it's going to help very much.
And Rebecca?
Well, I think I would have two takeaways to build on what you're saying. The first is that there's no replacement for professional judgment, that these are powerful tools. We still have to exercise professional judgment about how we make sense of them, how we make sense of the data, and use them responsibly with that vision of broad education in mind. And we can't test or create a system that displaces professional judgment by educators. And then the other thing is that there are different tools in this new Smarter Balance package. One is the summative assessment, and I absolutely agree. It's a leading indicator. It's one measure of how we're doing, but it isn't really going to, or it shouldn't drive instruction. It can just give us an indication that maybe we need to look a little bit deeper at what we're doing in the classroom, what our students are able to do, and how that might be leading to some of those results we're seeing. There are also other aspects of the test that I think are helpful. One is that it's an adaptive test, so hopefully will give us a little bit more differentiated information on students, and we won't have a situation, hopefully, where as many students are feeling that they can't do a single item, or they answer the entire test correctly. It will give us a better read of where students are. And the other piece is that there is the formative toolkit, where if we see a child is really struggling with a certain concept, there are tools in that toolkit where the teacher might be able to give a series of items that might help them understand better what this individual child does or doesn't understand, where that's breaking down. And that might help them target instruction. I think in the context of that, we have to just keep asking ourselves, what is appropriate, what are the formative tools we can have, and then how do we use that information in the context of this broad vision for education we have. So we could also make the mistake of being too narrowly focused on the formative toolkit and the test as the entire education. That's not it either. We're not saying that your entire program is now working from these tools. We're saying, as a teacher, use your professional judgment, take advantage of these tools to try to understand how to better tailor and develop your program.
Little thing on that, even when you have your formative or interim assessments with SBAC, they do have some limitations to them. They are constructed very much upon a very narrow definition of a cognate, and it's very hierarchical, linear, and structured. And so it doesn't go over here and deal with this special skill or attribute or personality of this child. It's right here. It can help you a great deal right here, but don't expect it to be everything for all children.
I would agree with that. And one of the things, I did a series of interviews with principals in another state, and one of the things that really concerned me with states that were using benchmark assessments is that the benchmark assessments became high stakes because the perception was that they would be predictive of testing on the final assessment. And the danger of that is then your entire program becomes test preparation, and that doesn't serve kids well, and that's not what we're striving for in Vermont.
And the links from here, this grade to that grade to the next are pretty loose. And so I wouldn't put too much value in trying to get that linkage, much as Rebecca is saying here.
Well, Bill and Rebecca, I really thank you for doing this, because I think that your comments are going to give people a really good frame for considering the things we're going to be presenting for the rest of the day. So thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. And we encourage anyone who wants to recommend their local legislator or their local reporter to come and take the Smarter Balance with children this spring.